Captain Megan Torres stood motionless in the briefing room at Camp Leatherneck, her desert camouflage uniform bearing the crisp creases of morning preparation. The Nevada sun had barely crested the horizon at 600 hours, yet the tension in the room was already suffocating. 47 Marines sat in rigid formation before her, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed doubt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The words that had been spoken just moments before still hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Women have no business commanding infantry marines in hostile territory, General Robert Hayes had declared, his weathered face set in stone. They lack the physical presence, the instinctive aggression, and most importantly, the unquestioned authority necessary to bring combat Marines home alive when the shooting starts. The silence that followed wasn't the respectful quiet of soldiers awaiting orders. It was the electric stillness that precedes a thunderstorm, charged with unspoken questions and institutional friction that had been building for months. Megan's hazel eyes remained fixed on a point 6 inches above the general's silver hair, following the military protocol that had been drilled into her since her days at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. But beneath that disciplined exterior, a determination burned that would soon challenge everything these men believed about leadership, courage, and what it truly meant to serve. What General Hayes didn't know, what none of the 47 Marines seated before her knew, was that in less than 6 weeks, Captain Megan Torres would lead Delta Company through the most perilous extraction mission in the regiment's recent memory. She would navigate them through enemy-controlled territory that had claimed 3 previous rescue attempts, outsmart adversaries who had been perfecting their tactics for years, and employ strategies so innovative they would later become required study at Quantico. Most crucially, she would bring every single one of her 47 Marines home alive, proving that leadership isn't measured by assumptions or prejudices, but by the courage to make life-or-death decisions when everything hangs in the balance. The briefing room at Camp Leatherneck buzzed with an undercurrent of institutional tension that went far beyond the upcoming deployment to Syria. The walls displayed photographs of distinguished Marines who had served with honor, their weathered faces bearing witness to decades of Marine Corps tradition. Today, those images seemed to watch with judgment as an ancient brotherhood grappled with changes that challenged its most fundamental assumptions about warrior culture and battlefield command. Megan had been assigned to Delta Company 4 weeks earlier, replacing Major Timothy Brooks, who had been critically injured during a training accident involving live ordnance. The transition should have been routine, a qualified officer stepping into a leadership role vacated by unforeseen circumstances. But routine had been abandoned the moment General Hayes learned that Brooks' replacement would be a woman. Not just any woman, but one who had graduated second in her class from the Marine Infantry Officer course, the Corps' most demanding leadership crucible. The 47 Marines seated before her represented some of the finest warriors in the service. First Sergeant Carlos Mendez, a career Marine with 4 combat deployments and a reputation for transforming raw recruits into disciplined fighters. Staff Sergeant Bradley Cooper, whose expertise in urban warfare had earned him commendations from commanders across multiple theaters of operation. Sergeant Rebecca Johnson, barely 25, but already recognized as one of the most skilled communication specialists in the battalion. Each Marine had volunteered for this assignment, knowing it would involve extended operations in some of the most dangerous territory in the Syrian conflict zone. They had expected to serve under Major Brooks, a respected leader whose tactical brilliance had been proven in previous Middle Eastern deployments. Instead, they found themselves assigned to a captain who, despite her impressive credentials, had never led Marines in actual combat against a determined enemy. The fact that she was female added layers of complexity to an already challenging situation, creating doubts that extended far beyond questions of experience or tactical competence. General Hayes's opposition to Megan's assignment had been immediate and vocal. During the classified meeting where her deployment had been discussed, he had argued that placing a female officer in command of an elite infantry unit represented an unnecessary risk that could compromise mission effectiveness and endanger lives. His concerns weren't entirely without precedent. The integration of women into frontline combat roles remained relatively recent, and many senior officers harbored reservations about how these changes might affect unit cohesion and battlefield performance under extreme stress. "The enemy doesn't care about our social experiments," Hayes had told the base commander during their heated discussion. "They'll exploit any weakness, any moment of hesitation, any crack in our armor. When your Marines are pinned down in the mountains of Syria, they need absolute confidence in their leadership. How can we guarantee that confidence when we're asking them to follow someone whose authority they might question in the critical moment?" Base Commander Brigadier General Patricia Williams had listened to Hayes's concerns with the patience of someone who had encountered similar arguments throughout her groundbreaking career. As one of the first women to achieve general officer rank in the Marine Corps, she understood both the obstacles and the opportunities that accompanied breaking institutional barriers. Her response had been measured but unwavering. Captain Torres had earned her position through demonstrated merit, not political considerations, and she would receive the same opportunity to prove herself that any other officer would be granted. But earning the opportunity and gaining acceptance represented entirely different challenges. The Marines of Delta Company had served together for 18 months, developing the trust and brotherhood that could only be forged through shared hardship and mutual reliance. They had trained together, suffered together, and learned to depend on each other in ways that transcended normal professional relationships. The sudden introduction of a new leader, especially one who represented such a dramatic departure from their expectations, created uncertainty that could prove fatal in combat situations where split-second decisions determine who lived and who died. Megan understood these dynamics better than her critics anticipated. Her journey to this moment had been marked by similar challenges at every level of her military career. At the Naval Academy, she had faced instructors who questioned whether women possessed the physical strength necessary for infantry service. During officer candidate school, she had endured peers who suggested that female officers would inevitably become liabilities when bullets started flying. Throughout the infantry officer course, she had confronted doubts about her ability to command Marines who might not respect her authority in life or death situations. Each challenge had been met with the same response: exceptional performance that eliminated room for doubt about her capabilities. She had outperformed male counterparts in physical fitness assessments, exceeded standards in tactical exercises, and demonstrated leadership qualities that earned recognition from instructors who had initially questioned her presence in their programs. But achievements in controlled training environments differed significantly from the realities of combat leadership, and everyone in the room understood that crucial distinction. The specific mission that Delta Company would undertake in Syria involved establishing a forward operating base in Aleppo province, a region notorious for its treacherous terrain and active insurgent presence. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces had been using the area as a staging ground for attacks against coalition personnel, and Delta Company's assignment was to disrupt these operations through aggressive patrolling and targeted raids. The mission would require extended periods in hostile territory, complex coordination with international forces, and the tactical flexibility that could only emerge from experienced, confident leadership. General Hayes's briefing had been thorough and professional, outlining strategic objectives, operational constraints, and logistical requirements that would govern Delta Company's deployment. But his concluding remarks had shifted from military analysis to personal opinion, revealing the deeper concerns that motivated his opposition to Megan's assignment. The suggestion that women lacked necessary qualities for combat leadership wasn't merely a tactical assessment. It was a fundamental challenge to her right to serve in the role she had earned through years of preparation and demonstrated competence. The 47 Marines listened to this exchange with the disciplined silence expected of professional soldiers, but their expressions revealed the complexity of their feelings about the situation. Some, like First Sergeant Mendez, had served alongside female Marines in support roles and had developed respect for their capabilities and dedication. Others, particularly younger Marines, had never worked closely with women in military contexts and weren't certain what to expect from this new dynamic. Staff Sergeant Cooper had served under both exceptional and inadequate commanders during his career, learning to judge leaders by their actions rather than their demographics. But he also understood the unique challenges that combat leadership presented, and he wondered whether Captain Torres truly comprehended the life-or-death decisions that would soon rest in her hands. The Marines under her command weren't just soldiers. They were someone's sons, daughters, brothers, and sisters, and the weight of that responsibility could crush even experienced leaders who had proven themselves in previous conflicts. Megan Torres's journey to Delta Company had begun 12 years earlier in the small coastal town of Monterey Bay, California, where her father, retired Marine Gunnery Sergeant Eduardo Torres, had taught her that true strength wasn't measured by physical size or gender stereotypes. It was forged through mental resilience and the ability to make sound decisions under crushing pressure. Growing up near the rugged Pacific coastline, she had learned responsibility early, managing her family's small fishing charter business, maintaining complex equipment, and solving logistical problems that would have challenged seasoned professionals. But it was her father's stories about Marine Corps leadership philosophy that had shaped her understanding of what it meant to guide others through seemingly impossible circumstances. Eduardo had served 3 tours in Iraq, and his evening conversations with Megan had been filled with lessons about the delicate balance between authority and humility, between decisive action and careful consideration of consequences. At 17, Megan had witnessed her father coordinate a massive search and rescue operation when a commercial fishing vessel had gone missing during a Pacific storm. For 36 hours, she watched him organize Coast Guard assets, coordinate with civilian volunteers, and maintain hope among desperate families while managing his own fears about the missing crew. The vessel was eventually found with all hands safe, but the experience had shown Megan that leadership was about remaining calm when everyone else was losing their composure, about making decisions with incomplete information, and about accepting responsibility for outcomes beyond your complete control. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Her acceptance to the Naval Academy in Annapolis had been the culmination of years of academic excellence and community leadership, but her first year had presented challenges she hadn't anticipated. The academic rigor was manageable, her engineering coursework played to her analytical strengths, but the social dynamics of proving herself in a traditionally male environment required different skills entirely. During her sophomore year, Megan had participated in a complex wargaming exercise that would become legendary among her instructors. The scenario involved opposing naval forces engaged in a multi-day campaign where midshipmen commanded simulated fleets tasked with controlling strategic waterways while protecting merchant shipping. The exercise was designed to test not just tactical knowledge, but leadership under sustained pressure and the ability to adapt strategies when initial plans encountered unexpected obstacles. Megan's approach had been methodical and unconventional. While her male counterparts focused on aggressive maneuvers and overwhelming firepower, she had developed a strategy that emphasized intelligence gathering, strategic deception, and careful resource management. Her fleet had been assigned the smaller force, making traditional naval doctrine suggest she should avoid direct confrontation while seeking opportunities to engage enemy units individually. Instead, she had spent the first 2 days of the exercise conducting what appeared to be routine patrol patterns while actually gathering detailed intelligence about enemy capabilities, movement schedules, and communication procedures. Her ships had maintained passive sensor operations that allowed them to track enemy positions without revealing their own locations, building a comprehensive picture of enemy intentions and vulnerabilities. The breakthrough had come when Megan realized that the enemy commanders were following predictable patterns based on standard naval tactics taught in their coursework. By analyzing their movement data, she could predict where enemy forces would be positioned at specific times, allowing her to plan operations that would achieve maximum tactical impact while minimizing her own exposure to counterattack. Her strategy had reached its climax during the third night when she had simultaneously launched coordinated attacks against 3 separate enemy formations while making it appear that the assaults were coming from different directions entirely. The enemy commanders had been forced to divide their attention and resources, weakening their defenses at each location while struggling to understand the scope and nature of the threat they were facing. By dawn of the 4th day, Meagan's smaller force had achieved decisive tactical victories that eliminated the enemy's ability to control the strategic waterways while suffering minimal losses themselves. The exercise had demonstrated tactical innovation that impressed instructors who had been conducting similar war games for decades without witnessing such sophisticated strategic thinking from undergraduate students. Commander Patricia Stone, the Naval Academy instructor responsible for evaluating the exercise, had been particularly struck by Meagan's ability to maintain unit coordination while executing complex multi-phase operations under intense pressure. Most midshipmen try to win through direct confrontation and superior firepower, she had noted in her after-action report. Midshipman Torres understood that victory often comes through superior intelligence, patient planning, and the ability to think several moves ahead of your adversary. These are the qualities that distinguish competent officers from exceptional leaders who can succeed in complex operational environments. The success at Annapolis had led to Meagan's selection for the Marine Infantry Officer course at Quantico, where she would face the most demanding leadership training the Corps offered. The program was designed to push candidates beyond their physical and psychological limits, testing their ability to make sound decisions while exhausted, stressed, and operating with fragmented information in rapidly changing tactical situations. Of the 52 officers who had begun the course with Meagan, only 31 had successfully completed the program, and she had finished ranked second overall, an achievement that reflected not just her individual capabilities, but her ability to help struggling classmates succeed when the program's competitive environment could have encouraged a more selfish approach. The infantry officer course had introduced Meagan to the psychological complexities of modern combat leadership, including the mental challenges of commanding Marines in life-or-death situations where hesitation could prove fatal. One particularly demanding exercise had tested her ability to maintain unit effectiveness while managing multiple casualty scenarios that required immediate medical attention while tactical objectives remained incomplete. The scenario had placed her platoon in an urban environment where they were tasked with clearing a series of buildings held by opposing forces, but the exercise had been designed to create realistic casualty situations that would test her ability to balance mission accomplishment with the welfare of wounded personnel. Her solution had demonstrated both tactical innovation and sophisticated understanding of human psychology under extreme stress. Rather than allowing wounded Marines to compromise her remaining force's effectiveness, she had integrated casualty care into her overall tactical plan, using wounded personnel as intelligence sources about enemy capabilities, movement schedules, and communication procedures. Her approach had maintained unit combat effectiveness while addressing humanitarian concerns that could have paralyzed less experienced leaders, earning recognition from instructors who rarely witnessed such sophisticated decision-making from junior officers facing their first complex tactical scenarios. The psychological evaluation that formed part of the infantry officer course revealed qualities that would prove crucial in her future leadership roles. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the Marine Corps psychologist who conducted Meagan's assessment, had noted her exceptional ability to remain calm under extreme stress, her talent for reading the emotional states of subordinates, and her skill at maintaining unit morale during extended operations when normal support systems were unavailable. Captain Torres possesses the emotional intelligence necessary to lead Marines through the most challenging circumstances, Dr. Walsh had written in her evaluation. She understands that combat leadership requires not just tactical competence, but the ability to inspire confidence and maintain unit cohesion when everything else is falling apart around them. Her psychological profile suggests she would excel in situations where conventional leadership approaches prove inadequate. Following her success at Quantico, Meagan had been assigned to the 1st Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, where she served as a platoon leader in Charlie Company under Major Stephen Martinez. Martinez had initially harbored reservations about having a female officer in his unit, but Megan's performance during training exercises had quickly earned his respect and professional admiration. She had demonstrated an exceptional ability to connect with Marines from diverse backgrounds, understanding their individual strengths and limitations while molding them into an effective fighting unit that could operate successfully in various tactical environments. Her approach to leadership was based on thorough preparation and clear communication that ensured every Marine understood not just their individual responsibilities, but how their actions contributed to overall mission success. During her assignment at Pendleton, Megan had participated in joint training exercises with Special Operations Forces that exposed her to advanced tactics and technologies that most infantry officers never encountered. She had learned about close-quarters combat techniques, advanced communication systems, and small unit operations that would prove invaluable in complex operational environments where conventional approaches might prove inadequate. More importantly, she had worked alongside operators who evaluated her solely on performance rather than gender, providing her with confidence that would prove essential when facing institutional skepticism about her capabilities. These experiences had taught her that exceptional performance could overcome prejudice, but only when that performance was consistent, measurable, and undeniably superior to established standards. One training exercise had involved a simulated hostage rescue mission, where Megan's platoon had been tasked with infiltrating a fortified compound held by opposing forces. The scenario had been designed to test decision-making under extreme time pressure, with intelligence suggesting that hostages would be executed if the assault wasn't completed within a specific time frame that left little margin for error or tactical adjustment. Megan had developed an approach that utilized multiple entry points and coordinated movements designed to overwhelm defenders while minimizing risk to both her Marines and the simulated hostages. The plan had required precise timing and flawless execution, with each element of her platoon performing specific tasks that contributed to overall mission success while maintaining the flexibility to adapt if unexpected obstacles were encountered. The execution had been nearly flawless, with Megan's forces achieving complete tactical surprise and neutralizing all opposing positions within the required time frame. But the exercise had also presented her with an unexpected challenge when one of her Marines had been designated as wounded during the assault and required immediate evacuation that could have compromised mission completion. Rather than abandoning the mission or leaving the wounded Marine behind, Megan had adapted her plan in real time, using the wounded Marine's position as a base of fire support while continuing the assault with reduced forces. Her ability to maintain tactical flexibility while adapting to changing circumstances had impressed special operations instructors who rarely encountered such sophisticated thinking from conventional infantry officers. The after-action review had been overwhelmingly positive, with special operations instructors praising Megan's ability to maintain tactical innovation while adapting to unexpected developments. Most officers become rigid when their initial plan encounters problems, Chief Warrant Officer Robert Thompson, a veteran of multiple combat deployments, had noted. Captain Torres demonstrated the kind of adaptive leadership that separates competent officers from exceptional commanders who can succeed when circumstances demand innovation rather than adherence to doctrine. Megan's reputation within the 1st Marine Division had been built through consistent, superior performance across multiple training scenarios that tested different aspects of combat leadership. She had led her platoon through desert warfare exercises in California, jungle operations in the Philippines, and urban combat training in various locations across the Pacific region. Each environment had presented unique challenges, but Megan had consistently demonstrated the ability to analyze terrain, understand enemy capabilities, and develop tactics that maximized her unit's effectiveness while minimizing casualties and resource expenditure. Her approach to leadership had emphasized thorough preparation and clear communication protocols that ensured every Marine understood not just their individual role, but how their actions contributed to overall mission success. She had established procedures for dealing with various contingencies, from equipment failures to casualty situations, that allowed her unit to maintain effectiveness even when circumstances changed rapidly or unexpectedly.
The Marines under Megan's command had initially been uncertain about serving under a female officer, but her competence and dedication had quickly earned their professional respect and personal loyalty. Lance Corporal Anthony Davis, a machine gunner in her platoon, had commented that Captain Torres knows more about small unit tactics than most majors I've worked with. She never asks us to do anything she wouldn't do herself, and she always has a plan for whatever situation we might encounter. When she gives an order, you know it's been thought through completely. Megan's technical expertise had been particularly evident during a complex training exercise that simulated a multi-day operation in enemy territory. Her platoon had been required to move through hostile terrain, establish observation posts, and conduct reconnaissance missions while avoiding detection by opposing forces that possessed superior knowledge of the local terrain. Throughout the exercise, Megan had maintained detailed logs of enemy movements, terrain features, and weather conditions that might affect future operations. Her analysis had revealed patterns in enemy behavior that allowed her platoon to predict their movements and avoid detection while gathering valuable intelligence that contributed to overall mission success. When the exercise shifted to offensive operations, Megan's forces possessed complete situational awareness that enabled them to achieve their objectives with minimal risk and maximum effectiveness. The operations center at Al-Assad hummed with the controlled intensity of a major military hub processing real-time intelligence from across the Syrian theater. Banks of sophisticated computer screens displayed tactical overlays of the Euphrates River Valley, where red icons marked confirmed enemy positions and blue symbols indicated coalition forces scattered across the unforgiving desert landscape. Colonel Marcus Wheeler, the task force commander, stood before a massive holographic display that rendered the mountainous terrain of eastern Syria in stark three-dimensional detail. The mission he was about to assign would test every assumption of leadership, tactical innovation, and survival in one of the world's most complex combat environments. "The situation in the Tan Corridor has reached a critical threshold," Colonel Wheeler announced to the assembled company commanders, his voice carrying the gravity of decisions that would determine the fate of hundreds of Marines. "Intelligence indicates that insurgent forces have established a sophisticated network of weapons depots and training facilities throughout the region. They've been exploiting the terrain to conduct coordinated attacks against our supply convoys, then melting back into cave systems and underground tunnels that our conventional surveillance cannot effectively penetrate." Megan studied the three-dimensional tactical display with the analytical precision that had become her trademark throughout her military career. The corridor stretched for nearly 60 miles through some of the most challenging terrains in Syria, with rocky plateaus rising over 8,000 feet and deep wadis that created natural ambush points where small forces could devastate much larger formations. Any force operating in this environment would be essentially isolated from conventional support systems, dependent on helicopter resupply that could be grounded for days by weather conditions, or enemy air defense systems that have proven surprisingly effective against coalition aircraft.
The intelligence briefing that followed painted a picture of an enemy that had evolved tactically with disturbing effectiveness over the past 18 months. Major Catherine Rivers, the task force intelligence officer, displayed satellite imagery showing carefully camouflaged positions that had been constructed over months of patient preparation. "The insurgents have learned to exploit our technological advantages," she explained, indicating areas where traditional surveillance methods had proven inadequate. "They move primarily during sandstorms when our overhead assets are compromised, use natural terrain features to avoid thermal detection, and have established communication networks that rely on couriers and coded signals rather than electronic systems we can intercept." The enemy's tactical evolution had been driven by years of experience fighting coalition forces across multiple theaters. They had learned to anticipate helicopter landing zones, positioning weapon systems where they could engage aircraft during their most vulnerable approach and departure phases. Their knowledge of local terrain was encyclopedic, allowing them to move through areas where American forces required GPS systems and detailed maps simply to maintain basic navigation. Most troubling, they had demonstrated an ability to coordinate attacks across multiple locations simultaneously, suggesting a level of organizational sophistication that exceeded previous intelligence estimates by significant margins. The strategic objective is unambiguous, Colonel Wheeler continued, his finger tracing a complex route through the valley on the digital display. We need to establish a permanent coalition presence in the Tanf corridor that can disrupt enemy logistics operations and provide a launching point for extended operations throughout the eastern provinces. The mission will require a company-sized force capable of independent operations for up to 8 months, with minimal external logistical support and maximum tactical flexibility in responding to changing threat conditions. Megan's mind processed the implications of what she was hearing with growing concern. An 8-month deployment in isolated terrain meant that her Marines would be completely cut off from the normal support infrastructure that American forces typically relied upon for medical evacuation, equipment maintenance, and tactical reinforcement. Medical evacuation would be complicated by weather conditions and active enemy air defense systems. Equipment resupply would be irregular and dangerous, requiring helicopter operations through contested airspace. Communication with higher headquarters would be limited by mountainous terrain that blocked radio signals and enemy jamming capabilities that had proven increasingly sophisticated. Every tactical decision would have to be made with the understanding that conventional reinforcement might be impossible for weeks at a time, forcing her to operate more like a special operations unit than a conventional infantry company. The mission parameters were unlike anything she had encountered during her extensive training or previous deployments to less challenging environments. Traditional military doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower supported by close air support, artillery systems, and rapid reinforcement when tactical situations became critical. But the Tanf corridor assignment would require her to operate with small numbers of highly skilled Marines to achieve strategic objectives that would normally require much larger forces with extensive support infrastructure. Major Rivers continued her briefing with specific intelligence about enemy capabilities in the target area that painted an increasingly grim picture. We've identified at least 5 major weapon storage facilities and multiple training camps that are producing fighters for operations throughout the region. The insurgents have also established a sophisticated early warning network that allows them to track our movements and prepare defensive positions well before we arrive in their operational areas. Previous attempts to establish a permanent presence have failed because conventional tactics allowed the enemy to predict our actions and prepare accordingly. The failures of previous operations had been studied extensively by military analysts who were struggling to understand why traditional American approaches had proven inadequate in this particular environment. 3 separate company-sized operations had been conducted in the corridor during the past 14 months, all commanded by experienced officers with proven track records in similar environments. The first had ended in tactical failure when insurgent forces had used improvised explosive devices and coordinated ambushes to inflict casualties that forced an early withdrawal after only 6 weeks. The second operation had achieved some limited tactical successes but had been unable to establish the permanent presence required due to logistical challenges and continuous enemy harassment that made sustained operations impossible. The third attempt had resulted in the loss of an entire platoon when enemy forces had surrounded and overwhelmed an isolated outpost, leading to a strategic reassessment of American capabilities in the region. Colonel Wheeler's expression became more serious as he outlined the specific challenges that the next operation would face, challenges that had defeated experienced commanders and well-equipped forces. The enemy has systematically studied our standard operating procedures over multiple deployments. They understand how we establish defensive perimeters, how we conduct patrol operations, and how we typically respond to enemy contact. Any force operating in the corridor will need to develop completely new tactical approaches that cannot be anticipated or effectively countered by enemy forces who have proven adept at exploiting our predictability. Megan raised her hand, a gesture that immediately drew attention from every officer in the briefing room. "Sir, what intelligence do we have about the enemy's supply lines and external support? If they've been able to sustain operations for this long in such an isolated area, they must have logistics networks that could be vulnerable to interdiction if we can identify and target them effectively." Her question revealed the kind of strategic thinking that had distinguished her throughout her career, focusing on systemic vulnerabilities rather than just tactical considerations.
While other officers were concentrating on the immediate operational challenges, Megan was already thinking about how to disrupt the enemy's ability to sustain their defensive preparations. Colonel Wheeler paused to consult with Major Rivers before responding. Intelligence suggests they're receiving supplies through a network of smuggling routes that cross the Iraqi border, but we haven't been able to identify specific choke points where interdiction operations would be feasible. What are you thinking, Captain? The enemy's tactical sophistication suggests they're receiving not just weapons and ammunition, but also training and intelligence support from external sources, Megan explained, moving closer to the tactical display. If we can identify their communication nodes and supply transfer points, we might be able to disrupt their operations more effectively than trying to engage them in prepared defensive positions where they hold all the advantages. Her suggestion demonstrated tactical innovation that impressed the other company commanders present, but also revealed the complexity of the operational environment they would be entering. Captain Bradley Harrison, commander of Alpha Company, had been considering a more conventional approach based on established doctrine. That's a significant departure from our normal operating procedures, he noted. If we start targeting infrastructure instead of enemy personnel, we could face political complications that might affect our mission parameters.
Megan's response showed her understanding of both the tactical and strategic implications of unconventional approaches. Every tactical decision involves risk assessment, but the enemy has proven that they can counter our conventional methods. Sometimes the biggest risk is continuing to do what hasn't worked in the past, especially when Marines' lives are at stake. The discussion that followed revealed the institutional challenges facing military leaders who needed to adapt to enemies that had successfully evolved beyond traditional American tactical advantages. Colonel Wheeler encouraged debate among his commanders, recognizing that the most effective tactical solutions often emerged from the exchange of different perspectives and operational experiences from various deployment environments. Major Rivers provided additional intelligence that supported Megan's unconventional approach. The enemy's supply network appears most vulnerable during the transfer operations when materials are moved from temporary storage sites to operational positions. Their security is necessarily reduced during these movements, and they're forced to use predictable routes due to terrain constraints that limit their options. The logistical implications of Megan's proposal were significant and would require extensive coordination with intelligence assets and special operations forces that operated independently of conventional military units. Instead of concentrating forces at a single forward operating base, the operation would require multiple small teams positioned to monitor and interdict enemy supply operations while maintaining the capability to coordinate defensive operations if they were discovered and attacked. Captain Harrison voiced concerns that many officers felt about deviating from established tactical doctrine. The infantry officer course teaches us to concentrate our forces and maintain unit integrity for mutual support. What you're suggesting disperses our strength and could leave individual teams vulnerable to defeat in detail if the enemy discovers our positions. Megan's response demonstrated her ability to think beyond conventional doctrine when tactical circumstances demanded innovation. Traditional concentration of forces assumes we can achieve tactical superiority through overwhelming combat power. But this enemy has proven they can negate our advantages when we operate predictably. Sometimes tactical dispersion creates opportunities that conventional approaches cannot achieve, especially when we're operating in terrain that favors defenders over attackers. The debate continued for over 2 hours, with each commander contributing insights based on their experience and tactical philosophy. Colonel Wheeler listened carefully to all perspectives, understanding that the operational decision would have profound implications for mission success and the lives of the Marines who would execute whatever plan was finally approved. The tactical complexity was further complicated by political considerations that affected how American forces could operate in the Syrian environment. Rules of engagement were restrictive, limiting the types of targets that could be engaged without explicit authorization from higher headquarters. Cooperation with allied forces was required, but often difficult due to language barriers and different operational procedures. Local tribal relationships were complex and potentially volatile, requiring careful consideration of cultural factors that could affect mission success.
Intelligence analysis revealed that the enemy had studied previous American operations extensively, learning to exploit not just tactical weaknesses, but also political and cultural constraints that limited American operational flexibility. They had demonstrated an understanding of American decision-making processes that allowed them to manipulate the operational environment by creating situations where American commanders faced impossible choices between mission accomplishment and adherence to restrictive rules of engagement. Colonel Wheeler's final decision reflected both the tactical necessities of the operational environment and his assessment of which commander possessed the innovative thinking necessary to succeed where others had failed. Captain Torres, you'll command the Tanf Corridor operation. Your unconventional approach demonstrates the kind of tactical thinking we need to break the cycle of failed operations. But I want you to understand that this mission will test every leadership skill you've developed. You'll be operating with minimal support in an environment where conventional tactical solutions have proven inadequate. The assignment represented both an extraordinary opportunity and a tremendous burden of responsibility. Megan would be commanding not just Delta Company, but also additional specialists, intelligence personnel, and support elements that would bring her total force to 47 Marines and attached personnel. The mission would require her to establish multiple forward operating positions, conduct offensive operations against enemy logistics networks, and maintain security in an area where 3 previous commanders had encountered failure. The planning phase that would consume the next 4 weeks would demand every analytical skill she had developed throughout her military education and operational experience. Intelligence specialists would provide continuous updates on enemy capabilities and movement patterns. Logistics officers would develop contingency plans for extended operations with irregular resupply schedules. Communications experts would design systems capable of functioning reliably in the challenging terrain and electronic environment of eastern Syria. But the most critical element of the planning process would be preparing her 47 Marines for operations that would demand exceptional individual competence, unit cohesion, and tactical flexibility under circumstances that would test their physical and psychological limits. The first indication that their carefully planned operation was collapsing came at 0423 hours on a dust-shrouded morning in the Tanf Corridor when Staff Sergeant Cooper's voice cut through the radio static with barely controlled urgency. "Phoenix Base, this is Reaper 6. We have multiple KIA and are completely surrounded. The enemy was waiting for us. They knew exactly where we'd be."
Megan's blood turned to ice as she processed the devastating implications of Cooper's transmission from her command post overlooking the vast Syrian desert. Reaper Team had been inserted 18 hours earlier at Landing Zone Scorpion, a seemingly secure location that intelligence had assured her was beyond enemy surveillance capabilities. Their mission was to establish an observation post on the eastern ridgeline that would provide early warning for the main insertion scheduled for the following dawn. Instead, they had walked directly into a meticulously prepared killing zone that suggested the enemy possessed intelligence capabilities far more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. The multi-phase insertion plan that Megan had spent weeks perfecting was disintegrating in real time, and Marines were dying because of intelligence failures that had placed them in tactically impossible positions. The tactical situation was unraveling with terrifying speed across multiple locations simultaneously. The Ghost Team, inserted at the same time 3 miles to the west, had gone completely silent after reporting suspicious movement in their area. Phantom Team's helicopter had been forced to abort its insertion when the aircraft came under coordinated fire from concealed positions, leaving 9 Marines circling overhead in a damaged aircraft while enemy forces repositioned to engage them again. The carefully coordinated plan that Megan had developed through exhaustive analysis and tactical innovation was collapsing under the weight of intelligence failures that had fundamentally mischaracterized enemy capabilities and intentions. "Reaper 6, this is Phoenix Actual," Megan responded, her voice maintaining the calm authority that had been developed through years of crisis management training. "What's your current tactical situation and immediate requirements?" But even as she asked the question, she understood that conventional rescue operations might be impossible. The enemy had clearly anticipated this exact scenario, positioning forces to interdict American helicopter movements while systematically eliminating isolated teams that couldn't be reinforced through normal channels. Cooper's reply confirmed her worst tactical fears. Phoenix Actual, we've lost 4 Marines with 6 more wounded. Enemy fire is coming from positions we can't identify or effectively engage. They're using the terrain to remain concealed while systematically destroying our defensive perimeter. We need immediate fire support or we're going to be completely overrun within the hour. The forward command post that Megan had established at the entrance to the corridor erupted into controlled chaos as her staff worked frantically to coordinate support for the embattled teams scattered across hostile territory. Captain Jennifer Walsh, her operations officer, was attempting to re-establish contact with Ghost Team while simultaneously coordinating with aviation assets that were struggling to operate in the confined terrain under heavy enemy fire. Major Robert Kim, the intelligence officer whose assessments had assured her that the insertion sites were secure, was desperately reviewing his reports while trying to understand how the enemy had anticipated their movements with such devastating precision. "Ma'am, we're receiving conflicting situation reports from all operational areas," Captain Walsh reported, her normally composed demeanor beginning to crack under the pressure of managing multiple simultaneous crises. The enemy appears to be conducting coordinated attacks designed to prevent us from reinforcing any single position. Every time we attempt to send support to one team, they engage our helicopters from positions that force us to abort the mission or risk losing aircraft and crews. Megan studied the tactical display that showed the scattered positions of her Marines across the corridor, each blue icon representing lives that hung in the balance, while she struggled to develop effective responses to a situation that exceeded every contingency they had planned for. The multi-directional insertion strategy that had seemed so tactically sound during the planning phase was now working against her, creating multiple isolated battles that she couldn't coordinate effectively due to terrain limitations and enemy jamming of communication systems. The enemy had succeeded in turning her tactical innovation into a strategic disaster by forcing her to fight on their terms rather than exploiting the advantages she had hoped to achieve through unconventional approaches. Communication breakdown was becoming as dangerous as enemy fire itself. The mountainous terrain that had complicated the initial insertion was now blocking radio signals between scattered teams, forcing Megan to rely on helicopter relays that were themselves under attack. Critical information was being lost or delayed in transmission, preventing her from developing an accurate understanding of the tactical situation or coordinating effective responses to the multiple crises unfolding simultaneously across her area of operations. The enemy had succeeded in turning her tactical innovation into a strategic disaster by forcing her to fight on their terms rather than exploiting the advantages she had hoped to achieve through unconventional approaches. Communication breakdown was becoming as dangerous as enemy fire itself. The mountainous terrain that had complicated the initial insertion was now blocking radio signals between scattered teams, forcing Megan to rely on helicopter relays that were themselves under attack. Critical information was being lost or delayed in transmission, preventing her from developing an accurate understanding of the tactical situation or coordinating effective responses to the multiple crises unfolding simultaneously across her area of operations. Major Kim's intelligence briefing from 12 hours earlier now seemed like a document from an entirely different conflict. "Ma'am, our initial assessment was fundamentally flawed," he admitted, his voice hollow with the realization that his analytical failures had directly contributed to the casualties we were now suffering. "The enemy has observation posts throughout the corridor that we never detected. They've been monitoring our preparations for weeks and positioning forces to counter exactly the tactics we planned to employ." The failure of American intelligence capabilities was both total and systematic. Satellite imagery had failed to detect enemy positions that were now revealing themselves through devastatingly effective fire. Electronic surveillance had missed communication networks that were allowing insurgent forces to coordinate attacks across multiple locations with near-perfect timing. Human intelligence sources had either been compromised or had deliberately provided false information that led American forces directly into carefully prepared traps. The psychological impact of the intelligence failure was evident among Megan's staff officers, experienced Marines who had planned and executed complex operations throughout their careers, but were now facing an enemy that had demonstrated superior preparation and tactical understanding. The confidence that had characterized their planning sessions was being replaced by doubt and uncertainty that threatened to paralyze the decision-making process at the moment when decisive action was most desperately needed. Megan's radio crackled again, this time with the voice of Gunnery Sergeant Peterson, whose Hawk team had been scheduled for insertion at dawn but was now observing the tactical disaster from their overwatch position. Phoenix Actual, we're monitoring all primary and alternate landing zones from our observation post. The enemy has repositioned heavy weapons and anti-aircraft systems to engage helicopters during landing operations. All insertion sites are compromised. We need to abort the main insertion or we're going to lose aircraft, crews, and the Marines they're carrying. The collapse of the insertion plan meant that Megan's carefully calculated force structure was falling apart in real time. Instead of 47 Marines operating as a coordinated unit capable of achieving strategic objectives through tactical innovation, she now had scattered teams fighting for survival, while the bulk of her forces remained trapped at the forward command post, unable to reinforce their comrades due to enemy air defense capabilities that had appeared overnight. The enemy's tactical sophistication was becoming apparent through their systematic exploitation of American operational weaknesses. They had studied coalition tactics extensively, learned to anticipate American responses, and developed countermeasures that neutralized technological advantages while exploiting institutional limitations. More troubling, they had demonstrated an understanding of American decision-making processes that allowed them to manipulate the flow of battle by forcing American commanders into reactive rather than proactive tactical positions. Captain Walsh's attempts to coordinate close air support were met with frustration and bureaucratic delays that reflected institutional procedures designed for different tactical environments. Ma'am, close air support is being denied due to proximity of friendly forces and inability to achieve positive target identification. The enemy is exploiting our own rules of engagement by operating close to our positions and using terrain features that make it impossible to distinguish between combatants and potential civilians. Megan's communication with Colonel Wheeler was becoming increasingly strained as the task force commander demanded explanations for the tactical disaster that was unfolding across multiple operational areas. Taurus, what's your current assessment of the situation? We're showing multiple casualty reports and requests for support that we cannot provide due to enemy capabilities that weren't identified in your intelligence preparation. How did your planning process miss such extensive enemy preparations? The question highlighted the fundamental disconnect between the operational reality her Marines were facing and the institutional expectations of senior commanders who were applying peacetime administrative procedures to wartime crises that demanded immediate tactical innovation. American forces had planned their operation based on intelligence assumptions about enemy capabilities and intentions, but the enemy had been conducting their own intelligence operations that provided them with superior information about American plans, capabilities, and institutional limitations. The tactical mathematics were becoming impossible to ignore or rationalize through conventional military thinking. Megan's scattered teams were facing an enemy that outnumbered them, held superior defensive positions, possessed intimate knowledge of the terrain, and had demonstrated the ability to coordinate complex operations across multiple locations simultaneously. The multi-directional insertion strategy that was supposed to provide tactical surprise had instead created multiple isolated battles that the enemy could win through superior preparation and positioning. Cooper's voice cut through the radio chatter with increasing desperation that reflected the deteriorating situation his team faced. Phoenix Actual, we're running critically low on ammunition and the wounded need immediate medical evacuation. The enemy is systematically closing off our escape routes. If we don't receive reinforcements within the next 30 minutes, we're going to be completely overrun. The enemy's electronic warfare capabilities were proving more sophisticated than intelligence had predicted or prepared for. They were using selective jamming techniques to disrupt American communications while maintaining their own command and control systems that allowed near-perfect coordination between widely separated units. The result was a tactical fog of war that prevented American commanders from understanding the true scope of the situation while enemy forces operated with complete situational awareness. Major Kim's continuing analysis was revealing the depth of the intelligence failure that had led to the current tactical disaster. "Ma'am, the enemy appears to have been conducting surveillance of our forward command post for weeks before the operation began. They knew our insertion plans, our communication procedures, and our standard tactical responses to various contingencies. This wasn't just a successful ambush, it was a comprehensive trap designed to exploit our institutional predictability and operational limitations." The psychological dimensions of the enemy strategy were becoming clear through their systematic exploitation of American cultural assumptions about technological superiority and overwhelming firepower. They understood that American military doctrine emphasized rapid, decisive operations supported by advanced technology, so they had created a tactical environment where these advantages were neutralized or turned into liabilities. At the most critical moment, when decisive leadership was desperately needed, Colonel Wheeler's voice crackled over the radio with orders that reflected institutional priorities rather than tactical necessities. "Torres, you will maintain current positions and await reinforcement from division assets. Do not attempt unauthorized rescue operations. We're coordinating with higher headquarters to develop a comprehensive response that addresses the full tactical situation." Megan's grip tightened on the radio handset as she processed the implications of Wheeler's directive. A comprehensive response from division headquarters meant committees, planning sessions, and the kind of deliberate decision-making process that could take hours or days to implement while her Marines fight for their lives in isolated positions where minutes determine the difference between survival and death. The institutional machinery that was supposed to support combat operations was instead becoming an obstacle to saving lives, prioritizing bureaucratic procedures over the tactical realities that demanded immediate action. Senior commanders, who had never experienced the immediate pressure of combat decision-making, were applying peacetime administrative protocols to a wartime crisis that demanded rapid innovation and personal risk-taking. "Sir, with respect, we have Marines in immediate contact who require support right now," Megan replied, her voice carefully controlled despite the frustration building inside her. "Every minute we delay increases the probability of additional casualties. I have developed a plan that can extract our people using available assets, but it requires immediate execution and acceptance of tactical risks that may exceed normal operational parameters." The tactical plan that had been forming in Megan's mind since the first distress calls represented a complete departure from conventional military doctrine and institutional procedures. Instead of waiting for conventional reinforcement that might never arrive, she proposed to use the very isolation that had become their tactical weakness as a strategic advantage against an enemy that had positioned themselves to counter traditional American responses. The enemy had prepared extensively to counter conventional rescue operations, but they might not be ready for the kind of aggressive small unit tactics that Megan had studied during her advanced training with Special Operations Forces. Her approach would require her to personally lead a rescue force composed of volunteers from her remaining Marines, violating every principle of sound military leadership by placing the commanding officer at extreme personal risk. But it represented the only realistic possibility for saving the lives of Marines who were depending on her leadership and tactical innovation to bring them home alive. The silence in the command post stretched for exactly 19 seconds after Cooper's final transmission. 19 seconds that felt like an eternity as Megan stared at the radio handset, willing it to crackle back to life with confirmation that Reaper Team had survived the enemy's final assault. Around her, the faces of her staff officers reflected the same hollow realization settling in her chest. The conventional military response system had failed catastrophically, and Marines were dying while institutional protocols prevented decisive action. Colonel Wheeler's voice cut through the static-filled silence with the cold authority of someone who had never been forced to watch his tactical plans disintegrate in real time. Torres, you will hold current positions and maintain defensive posture. The division is coordinating with theater commands to develop a comprehensive extraction plan. The estimated timeline for implementation is 16 to 24 hours. Megan's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she processed the devastating implications of Wheeler's timeline. 16 to 24 hours meant planning committees, risk assessments, and the kind of methodical decision-making process that prioritized institutional liability over the lives of Marines who might not survive another 16 minutes, much less 16 hours. The bureaucratic machinery designed to support combat operations had become an instrument of delay when rapid action represented the only possibility for preventing additional casualties. "Sir, respectfully, we don't have 16 hours," Megan replied, her voice maintaining professional composure while her mind raced through tactical alternatives that conventional doctrine would never approve of. "Current intelligence indicates enemy forces are moving to consolidate positions around our isolated teams. If we don't extract them immediately, we're going to lose everyone who's still alive out there." The tactical plan forming in Megan's consciousness represented a complete abandonment of established military procedures and institutional safety protocols. Instead of waiting for conventional reinforcement that would arrive too late to matter, she would lead a small volunteer force through terrain that the enemy considered impassable, using their own tactical assumptions against them while exploiting gaps in their defensive preparations that existed only because they had focused on countering traditional American responses. Wheeler's response was immediate and inflexible, revealing the institutional paralysis that had infected senior leadership when confronted with tactical situations that exceeded their peacetime training and bureaucratic experience. Negative. You are explicitly ordered not to risk additional personnel without proper authorization. The enemy has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our intelligence estimates. We cannot afford to compound our losses through unauthorized operations. The institutional disconnect was complete and absolute. Senior commanders who had never experienced the psychological pressure of combat decision-making were applying administrative protocols to a tactical crisis that demanded immediate innovation and personal risk-taking. Captain Walsh approached Megan with an intelligence update that made the tactical situation even more desperate and time-critical. "Ma'am, we're intercepting enemy communications indicating they're moving additional forces to eliminate our remaining teams before we can organize rescue operations. They're not just holding defensive positions, they're actively hunting our people with the intent to prevent any survivors from providing intelligence about their capabilities and operational methods." The enemy's tactical evolution was becoming clear through their communication patterns and troop movement signals. They had learned to exploit American institutional decision-making processes by creating situations where conventional military responses were either impossible to implement or inadequate to address the tactical realities facing isolated American forces. By forcing American commanders to choose between following established procedures and taking decisive action to save lives, they had transformed institutional inertia into a tactical weapon that was as effective as any physical armament. Megan's internal struggle intensified as she weighed the competing demands of military discipline against her moral obligation to the Marines whose lives depended on her leadership. The oath she had taken as an officer emphasized loyalty to the Constitution and the protection of American lives, but the military justice system could destroy her career for disobeying direct orders, regardless of the humanitarian circumstances that motivated her actions. The psychological burden of command was forcing her to confront the fundamental question of what military service actually meant when institutional procedures conflicted with moral imperatives and the immediate welfare of the Marines she had sworn to lead and protect. Major Kim's continuing analysis revealed the full scope of the intelligence failure that had created the current crisis, but also provided tactical information that could guide unconventional rescue operations. "Ma'am, the enemy has positioned their forces to counter traditional helicopter insertions and conventional ground approaches, but they may not have adequately prepared for infiltration through the northern Wadi system.
It's treacherous terrain that they probably consider impassable for American forces, but it could provide concealment for a small team moving on foot. The tactical intelligence Kim was providing confirmed Megan's instinctive assessment that the enemy's defensive preparations, while sophisticated, contained exploitable weaknesses. They had studied American doctrine extensively and positioned their forces to counter predictable responses, but they might not be prepared for the kind of aggressive innovation that abandoned conventional procedures in favor of desperate improvisation. Sarah's radio crackled with another transmission from Gunnery Sergeant Peterson, whose overwatch position had allowed him to observe the tactical situation developing across the corridor. Phoenix Actual, I'm observing enemy movement toward Ghost Team's last known position. They're advancing in squad-sized elements with heavy weapons and what appears to be specialized assault equipment. If the Ghost Team is still alive, they're about to face overwhelming force that will eliminate any possibility of survival. The tactical intelligence Peterson was providing confirmed Megan's worst fears about enemy capabilities and intentions. They weren't simply defending prepared positions or conducting harassment operations. They were executing a systematic campaign designed to eliminate American forces before conventional rescue operations could be organized and implemented. The methodical approach they were employing suggested professional military training and sophisticated understanding of American tactical limitations and institutional weaknesses. Megan's decision-making process was complicated by the knowledge that her personal reputation and military career were at stake alongside the lives of her Marines. She had worked for years to prove herself in a military culture that questioned women's capabilities in combat leadership roles, overcoming institutional prejudice through exceptional performance and unwavering professionalism. A single act of insubordination could destroy everything she had achieved and provide ammunition for those who had opposed her assignment to combat command, potentially affecting future opportunities for other qualified women seeking similar positions. But the alternative was accepting the deaths of Marines who had trusted her leadership and followed her tactical guidance into a situation that had become impossible through intelligence failures and institutional paralysis beyond their control. The weight of command responsibility was forcing her to choose between personal advancement and the lives of the people she had sworn to protect and lead. Captain Walsh's voice interrupted her internal struggle with another urgent tactical update. "Ma'am, we're losing communication capability with all forward elements due to systematic enemy jamming operations. If we're going to coordinate any kind of response, it has to happen immediately before we lose the ability to maintain contact with our isolated teams." The communication breakdown was eliminating the last vestiges of conventional command and control that might have justified waiting for authorization from higher headquarters. Megan was being forced to make tactical decisions based on fragmented information while operating under direct orders that prohibit the kind of aggressive action that represented the only realistic possibility for saving lives. Her father's words echoed in her memory from conversations about the nature of military service and moral courage that had shaped her understanding of leadership responsibilities. The hardest decisions a leader makes are the ones where following orders conflicts with doing what's right. That's when you discover what kind of person you really are and what your service actually means to the people who depend on you. The tactical plan Megan had been developing represented a complete departure from conventional military doctrine, but it was based on her analysis of enemy capabilities and weaknesses rather than institutional procedures designed for different tactical environments. The enemy had prepared extensively for traditional American responses, but they might not be ready for the kind of rapid small unit infiltration that could reach trapped Marines before they were systematically eliminated. Her approach would require her to personally lead a rescue force composed entirely of volunteers from her remaining Marines, violating every principle of sound military leadership by placing the commanding officer at extreme personal risk. But it represented the only tactical option that offered any realistic possibility of preventing additional casualties. The moral mathematics of her decision were becoming clear as she calculated the probable outcomes of different courses of action. Following orders meant accepting the likely deaths of Marines who were depending on her leadership and tactical innovation. Disobeying orders meant risking court-martial proceedings that could end her career and potentially result in military prison, but it also represented the only possibility for fulfilling her fundamental obligation to bring her Marines home alive. Major Kim provided the final piece of tactical intelligence that would guide her decision. Ma'am, the Northern Wadi system provides concealment for movement, but it also offers multiple infiltration routes that could allow a small team to approach enemy positions from directions they haven't anticipated. The terrain is challenging, but it's navigable by personnel with proper preparation and equipment. Megan's understanding of the terrain and enemy capabilities was based on months of preparation and analysis that had prepared her for exactly this kind of tactical challenge. The enemy had studied American doctrine and positioned their forces to counter predictable responses, but they might not have anticipated the kind of innovative leadership that was willing to abandon conventional procedures in favor of tactical solutions that prioritized results over institutional compliance. The decision she was facing would define not only her military career, but her fundamental understanding of what service meant when institutional procedures conflicted with moral imperatives, and the immediate welfare of the people she had sworn to protect. The Marines trapped in enemy territory deserved leadership that prioritized their lives over bureaucratic compliance, even when that leadership required personal sacrifice and professional risk.
Captain Walsh approached with the final information that would influence her decision, her voice carrying a quiet understanding of the impossible choice Megan faced. "Ma'am, I've identified 14 volunteers who are prepared to move immediately. They understand the risks and the potential consequences, but they're willing to follow you anywhere. The only question is whether you're ready to lead them." The volunteers who had stepped forward represented the finest traditions of Marine Corps service, professional warriors who understood that their oath transcended institutional politics and bureaucratic procedures. They were willing to risk their lives and their careers to save fellow Marines, but they needed leadership that would guide them through the tactical challenges ahead while accepting responsibility for the consequences of actions that violated direct orders. Megan's hand moved to her radio handset as she prepared to make the transmission that would either save lives or destroy her career, possibly both. The institutional machinery that was supposed to support combat operations had failed completely, leaving her with only her training, her moral compass, and the courage to act when action was required rather than authorized. "All stations, this is Phoenix Actual," she transmitted, her voice carrying the calm authority that had been developed through years of preparation for exactly this moment. "I'm initiating emergency rescue operations for isolated personnel. All personnel not directly involved in base security will prepare for immediate movement. We're bringing our Marines home regardless of the cost." The silence that followed her transmission was different from the institutional paralysis that had characterized the previous hours. This was the focused quiet of professional Marines preparing for a mission that would test every skill they had developed and every assumption they held about leadership, courage, and the true meaning of military service. The 14 volunteers who had stepped forward began their final equipment checks with the methodical precision of warriors who understood they were about to undertake an operation that could result in their deaths, the end of their military careers, or both. But they also understood that some missions transcended personal considerations, requiring the kind of moral courage that defined the highest traditions of military service. Megan's decision to violate direct orders was based on her understanding that true leadership required the courage to make impossible choices when lives were at stake, regardless of personal consequences or institutional approval. The tactical situation ahead would test every assumption about leadership, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice personal interests for the welfare of subordinates who had placed their trust in her judgment and tactical competence. The 14 Marines who followed Megan into the treacherous darkness of the Northern Wadi system moved with the silent precision of apex predators, each step calculated to avoid detection by an enemy that had already proven their ability to anticipate American movements. The rocky gorge they traversed was a geological nightmare of loose shale and hidden crevasses, but it offered the only concealment from enemy observation posts that dominated the more accessible terrain. Megan led from the front, her night vision equipment revealing a landscape that seemed designed by nature to punish anyone foolish enough to attempt passage. The infiltration route she had chosen followed a series of interconnected ravines that would keep her team below the ridgelines where enemy surveillance was concentrated. But the path required them to navigate terrain that challenged their physical conditioning while maintaining the operational security necessary to avoid detection. The first critical test came 37 minutes into the infiltration when Corporal Maria Vasquez, the team's lead scout, signaled immediate halt with a raised fist that froze the entire column in place. Through her thermal imaging scope, Megan could observe the heat signatures of what appeared to be an enemy patrol moving along a parallel ravine approximately 300 meters to their north. The patrol consisted of 8 armed figures conducting systematic searches of terrain features that American forces might use for concealed movement. Their search pattern revealed both tactical sophistication and intimate knowledge of the local geography. But it also demonstrated the kind of methodical approach that could be predicted and exploited by forces willing to accept higher levels of risk. Megan's tactical training had taught her that enemy patrol patterns reveal both strengths and vulnerabilities in their security operations. By studying their movement rhythm and search procedures, she could identify windows of opportunity when her team could advance without detection. The key was timing their movement to coincide with periods when enemy attention was focused elsewhere, using the adversary's own thoroughness against them. The infiltration technique Megan employed was based on principles she had learned during joint training with Special Operations Forces, but adapted for the specific terrain and enemy capabilities they were facing. Instead of avoiding all contact with enemy forces, she used their predictable patrol schedules to mask her team's approach, moving through areas that had just been searched while enemy attention shifted to other sectors. Lance Corporal David Chen, the team's communications specialist, had established a relay system using burst transmissions and frequency agility that allowed them to maintain contact with the forward command post while minimizing their electronic signature. The system employed microburst communications that lasted less than 2 seconds, making detection and location extremely difficult, even for sophisticated enemy electronic warfare systems. The first objective was reaching the high ground overlooking Reaper Team's last known position, a rocky outcropping that would provide both tactical observation and potential fire support for rescue operations. The approach required crossing 4 separate ravine systems while avoiding detection by enemy forces that had demonstrated advanced surveillance capabilities and aggressive patrol schedules. Megan's navigation through the complex terrain was proving exceptional under conditions that exceeded anything their training had prepared them for. The Wadi system was more challenging than satellite imagery had suggested, with unstable rock formations that created noise hazards, flash flood channels that required careful route selection, and elevation changes that tested their physical endurance while carrying full combat equipment. Her preparation had included detailed study of geological surveys and hydrographic data that allowed her to anticipate these challenges and plan accordingly. But the reality of moving through such terrain while maintaining operational security pushed her team to their absolute limits. The second major obstacle emerged when Sergeant Michael Torres, the team's demolition specialist, detected signs of improvised explosive devices along their planned route. The enemy had apparently mined approaches to their positions, creating additional barriers designed to channel American forces into predetermined killing zones where conventional weapons could achieve maximum effectiveness. Megan's response demonstrated the adaptive thinking that separated exceptional leaders from competent ones. Instead of attempting to clear the explosive devices or finding alternative routes around them, she decided to use the minefield as tactical concealment. The enemy had positioned the explosives to funnel American forces into specific areas, but the same obstacles that threatened her team could provide concealment from enemy observation by discouraging patrol activity in areas known to be hazardous. The technique required precise navigation and constant awareness of their position relative to known hazards, but it allowed them to move through terrain where enemy forces wouldn't expect American personnel to operate. By paralleling the minefield rather than attempting to traverse it, Megan's team could exploit the psychological effect of the explosive barriers while avoiding their physical dangers. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Martinez, the team's medical specialist, had been monitoring intercepted radio communications from the trapped Marines and had developed a preliminary assessment of casualty situations that would guide their rescue priorities. Her intelligence suggested that multiple Marines required immediate medical treatment, but that several were still capable of supporting evacuation operations if they could be reached before their tactical situation deteriorated further. The infiltration's third phase brought them within 200 meters of Reaper Team's position, where the tactical situation revealed the full sophistication of enemy defensive preparations. Through her advanced optics, Megan could observe enemy positions that had been invisible during daylight reconnaissance, but were now revealed by the thermal signatures of their occupants and the muzzle flashes of their weapon systems. The enemy had established a sophisticated perimeter defense with interlocking fields of fire, multiple fallback positions, and what appeared to be a central command post coordinating defensive operations. Their positioning demonstrated professional military training and understanding of American tactical doctrine, suggesting they had been specifically prepared to counter conventional rescue attempts. But Megan's tactical analysis also revealed critical vulnerabilities in their defensive scheme. The enemy had concentrated their preparations on countering helicopter-borne rescue operations and conventional ground approaches, but they had not adequately secured the high ground that overlooked their own positions. The very terrain features they were using for concealment could be exploited through careful positioning and precise fire coordination. The rescue plan that emerged from her tactical assessment was based on psychological principles rather than overwhelming firepower. The enemy expected American forces to attempt direct assault or call for conventional fire support that would take time to coordinate and implement. Instead, Megan planned to use precision rifle fire from multiple concealed positions to create confusion about the size and location of the rescue force while simultaneously disrupting enemy command and control systems. Corporal James Wilson, whose marksmanship skills had earned him recognition throughout the battalion, was positioned to engage enemy personnel who appeared to be leaders or communication specialists. His mission was not to inflict maximum casualties, but to create psychological pressure that would force the enemy to respond to threats they couldn't accurately assess or locate. Lance Corporal Sarah Kim, the team's automatic weapons specialist, was positioned to provide suppressive fire that would prevent enemy forces from maneuvering effectively while the actual rescue operation was conducted. Her machine gun would create acoustic signatures and muzzle flashes designed to draw enemy attention away from the rescue team's actual location and activities. The coordination required for the rescue operation exceeded anything Megan had attempted during training or previous deployments. Each element of her team had to execute their assigned tasks with perfect timing while adapting to circumstances that couldn't be predicted or completely controlled. The margin for error was essentially zero, as any mistake could result in the deaths of both the rescue team and the Marines they were attempting to save. Megan's personal role in the operation was the most dangerous of all assignments. While her team provided tactical diversion and fire support, she would infiltrate the enemy perimeter and physically extract the wounded Marines from their defensive positions. The task required her to move through terrain under enemy observation while carrying personnel who might not be able to assist in their own evacuation. The execution began at precisely 03:47 hours when Corporal Wilson engaged the first target with a precision shot that eliminated what appeared to be an enemy commander. The psychological impact was immediate and dramatic, as enemy forces began responding to threats they couldn't locate while their command structure struggled to coordinate effective defensive measures. The enemy's response pattern revealed both their tactical strengths and operational limitations. They were well-trained and disciplined, maintaining fire discipline and attempting to locate the source of incoming fire. But they were also inflexible in their tactical thinking. Their response followed predictable patterns that Megan had studied during her intelligence preparation, allowing her to anticipate their reactions and exploit the confusion created by her team's deception operations. Lance Corporal Kim's suppressive fire created the acoustic signature of a much larger force, causing enemy commanders to believe they were facing a conventional assault rather than a small team rescue operation.
The psychological effect was enhanced by the careful timing of her fires, which created the impression of coordinated movement by multiple elements operating from different directions simultaneously. Megan's infiltration of the enemy perimeter represented a masterclass in individual tactical skills and situational awareness. She moved through terrain that challenged her physical conditioning while maintaining the mental focus necessary to avoid detection by enemy forces who were actively searching for American personnel. The combination of physical and psychological demands was extraordinary, but her preparation had been specifically designed for these exact conditions.
Her first contact with Reaper Team came when she reached Staff Sergeant Cooper, who was semi-conscious due to blood loss from multiple wounds. His condition was more critical than radio communications had indicated, requiring immediate medical intervention that could only be provided while under active enemy fire. "Captain, I can't believe you're actually here," Cooper whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of enemy fire that was now focused on the areas where Megan's team was providing tactical diversion. "We thought we were going to die out here. 3 Marines are dead, and 5 more are wounded badly enough to require immediate evacuation." Megan's medical training allowed her to quickly assess the condition of the wounded Marines and establish evacuation priorities that would maximize their chances of survival. The most critically wounded would require immediate extraction, but the process would demand multiple trips through enemy-controlled terrain while maintaining the tactical deception that was preventing the enemy from focusing their full attention on the rescue operation. The evacuation process tested every aspect of her physical conditioning and tactical training. Carrying wounded Marines through terrain that challenged unencumbered personnel pushed her to her absolute limits. But her determination was sustained by the knowledge that any hesitation could result in additional casualties. The enemy's growing awareness of the rescue operation was evident through their changing fire patterns and movement signatures. They were beginning to understand that they were facing a small rescue team rather than a conventional assault, and their response was becoming more focused and systematic. Megan's window of opportunity was closing rapidly, forcing her to accelerate the evacuation timeline while maintaining the tactical deception that was keeping her team alive. By 044 hours, all surviving members of Reaper Team had been successfully extracted from the enemy perimeter and were being evacuated to medical facilities where their wounds could receive appropriate treatment. The rescue operation had been completed without additional friendly casualties, demonstrating tactical innovation and personal courage that exceeded any reasonable expectations. But the success came at a cost that extended beyond the physical and psychological toll of the operation. Colonel Wheeler's voice crackled over the radio with barely controlled fury as Megan's team began their withdrawal to friendly positions. "Torres, you are relieved of command effective immediately. Your unauthorized operation violated direct orders and created a diplomatic incident. You will report for disciplinary proceedings once you return to base. Your military career is finished." The institutional consequences of her decision were immediate and severe, but Megan understood that she had chosen the only course of action consistent with her moral obligations as a Marine officer. She had brought every surviving member of her scattered teams home alive, proving that leadership sometimes required the courage to do what was right rather than what was authorized by distant commanders who didn't understand the tactical realities facing Marines in combat. The Marines she had rescued would live to serve another day, and the volunteers who had followed her into the darkness had witnessed leadership that transcended rank, gender, and institutional politics. That accomplishment would define her legacy, regardless of the personal consequences she would face in the aftermath of her decision to place Marine lives above bureaucratic compliance. The investigation that followed Megan's unauthorized rescue operation consumed the next 78 hours as a team of senior officers from Central Command descended upon Al-Assad Air Base to conduct what they euphemistically termed a comprehensive review of operational decision-making procedures. The inquiry revealed institutional biases that had motivated the investigation from its inception, with investigators appearing more interested in documenting violations of protocol than in understanding the tactical innovations that had made the rescue possible.
Major Patricia Vaughn, the investigating officer assigned to document Megan's actions, had arrived with preconceived assumptions about female officers and their force for independent command in combat situations. Her questioning revealed underlying beliefs that Megan's decision to disobey orders had been motivated by emotional instability rather than calculated tactical judgment based on field conditions and moral imperatives. Captain Torres, describe your psychological state during the period when you chose to violate Colonel Wheeler's explicit orders. Meyer Vaughn asked, her tone suggesting that emotional factors rather than tactical considerations had driven the decision-making process. Megan's response demonstrated the same composure that had carried her through the rescue operation and its immediate aftermath. "Ma'am, my psychological state was focused and determined. I had Marines in immediate danger, and the institutional response was inadequate to address the tactical situation they faced. My decision was based on tactical analysis and moral responsibility to the Marines under my command, not emotional factors." The investigation revealed that several senior officers had reached conclusions about Megan's actions before examining evidence or interviewing participants in the rescue operation. Colonel Harrison, who had originally opposed women in combat leadership roles, submitted a written statement arguing that the rescue operation proved female officers were psychologically unsuited for independent command decisions. Captain Torres's violation of direct orders demonstrates the kind of emotional decision-making that becomes inevitable when women are placed in command positions they're not psychologically equipped to handle, his statement read. But the investigation also uncovered perspectives that fundamentally challenged the official narrative about Megan's decision-making and leadership capabilities. Staff Sergeant Cooper, who had been rescued from the enemy perimeter during her operation, provided testimony that contradicted institutional characterizations of her actions as reckless insubordination. "Captain Torres saved my life and the lives of 13 other Marines through the most professional and courageous leadership I've witnessed in 15 years of military service," Cooper testified during his formal interview. Her actions were tactically sound, morally justified, and executed with precision that demonstrated superior training and judgment. Without her intervention, we would all be dead or captured by enemy forces. The 14 Marines who had volunteered to follow Megan into enemy-controlled territory provided similar testimony about her leadership during the rescue operation. Corporal Wilson, whose precision marksmanship had been crucial to the mission's success, testified that Megan's tactical plan had been more sophisticated than conventional operations he had participated in during previous deployments. "The captain understood enemy capabilities and weaknesses better than anyone else in the unit," Wilson stated during his interview. "Her plan succeeded because it was based on superior intelligence analysis and innovative tactical thinking that exploited enemy vulnerabilities they hadn't anticipated. She proved that exceptional leadership can overcome seemingly impossible tactical situations."
The medical personnel who had treated the rescued Marines provided evidence that fundamentally contradicted institutional narratives about the necessity and timing of Megan's intervention. Captain Elizabeth Thompson, the battalion surgeon, testified that several of the wounded Marines would have died without immediate medical evacuation that conventional procedures could not have provided within the required time frame. Captain Torres's decision to conduct the rescue operation was medically justified by the condition of the casualties and the tactical situation they faced, Dr. Thompson stated in her formal report. Delaying extraction for conventional authorization would have resulted in preventable deaths. Her actions saved lives that would have been lost through institutional paralysis. The investigation took an unexpected direction when intelligence analysts provided evidence that Megan's tactical innovations had achieved strategic objectives that extended far beyond the immediate rescue operation. The mission had not only saved lives, but had also disrupted enemy operations throughout the region while providing valuable intelligence about adversary capabilities and intentions. Major Kim, whose initial intelligence failures had contributed to the tactical crisis, was forced to acknowledge that Megan's operations had provided crucial information about enemy capabilities that had been unavailable through conventional intelligence gathering methods. The rescue operation inadvertently became an intelligence collection mission that revealed enemy weaknesses and operational patterns we hadn't been able to identify through traditional surveillance methods, he admitted during his testimony. The enemy's response to the rescue operation had exposed defensive vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future operations throughout the theater. Their communication procedures, tactical adjustments, and resource allocation decisions had been observed and analyzed by intelligence specialists who recognized the strategic value of information that Megan's team had gathered during their infiltration and extraction operations. The diplomatic implications of Megan's actions proved to be more complex than Colonel Wheeler had initially characterized. The successful rescue operation had been observed by local tribal leaders who had been monitoring American military capabilities and commitment to protecting their own personnel. The demonstration of American willingness to risk additional resources to save trapped Marines had enhanced coalition credibility among populations that had previously questioned American resolve and reliability. Embassy officials who had been monitoring regional reactions to the rescue operation reported that local perceptions of American military professionalism had actually improved as a result of Megan's actions. The political officer assigned to assess regional impact noted that the operation had demonstrated American values and military competence in ways that enhanced rather than damaged diplomatic relationships throughout the area. The investigation's most damaging revelations concerned institutional failures that had created the tactical crisis requiring Megan's intervention in the first place. The intelligence failures that had led to the initial ambush were traced to systematic problems in collection and analysis procedures that had been identified in previous after-action reports but had not been addressed by senior commanders. Colonel Wheeler's own role in the tactical disaster came under intense scrutiny as investigators discovered that his inflexible adherence to conventional procedures had contributed to casualties that Megan's rescue operation had prevented. His refusal to authorize immediate rescue operations had been based on institutional considerations rather than tactical analysis, revealing a command philosophy that prioritized bureaucratic compliance over mission effectiveness and Marine welfare. The testimony provided by rescued Marines was particularly damaging to institutional narratives about Megan's decision-making process. Their detailed accounts of the tactical situation, enemy capabilities, and the necessity of immediate action made it impossible to characterize her conduct as unnecessary insubordination rather than life-saving leadership under extreme circumstances. Lance Corporal Chen's description of the communication breakdown and enemy jamming operations provided technical evidence that conventional rescue procedures would have been impossible to coordinate or execute. The institutional response system had completely failed by the time Captain Torres made her decision, he testified. Without her intervention, we would have lost contact with all isolated teams and been unable to coordinate any kind of rescue operation. The formal hearing that determined Megan's fate took place in a secure conference facility at Central Command Headquarters, where she faced a panel of senior officers tasked with evaluating actions that had challenged fundamental assumptions about military discipline and combat leadership. The proceedings revealed institutional tensions created by her successful violation of conventional procedures and established command authority. General Patricia Williams, the senior officer responsible for the final decision, had been following the case closely due to its implications for military policy regarding women in combat roles and the broader questions it raised about leadership, moral courage, and institutional flexibility in complex operational environments. Her opening statement acknowledged the difficulty of evaluating leadership decisions that had violated established procedures while achieving results that conventional approaches had failed to accomplish. Captain Torres faced a tactical crisis that required immediate action to prevent loss of American lives. Her decision to violate direct orders must be evaluated in the context of circumstances that made conventional responses inadequate or impossible to implement within the required timeframe. The presentation of evidence during the hearing revealed that Megan's actions had been consistent with the highest traditions of military leadership and moral courage. Her tactical innovations, personal bravery, and dedication to Marine welfare had resulted in successful operations that saved lives while achieving strategic objectives that conventional methods had failed to accomplish.
The hearing's most dramatic moment came when Staff Sergeant Cooper, still recovering from wounds sustained during the initial ambush, testified about Megan's leadership during the rescue operation. His description of her tactical competence, personal courage, and moral authority provided vivid testimony that challenged every assumption underlying the investigation. Captain Torres demonstrated the kind of leadership that Marines are willing to follow into any situation, Cooper stated with obvious emotion. Her actions proved that true military leadership sometimes requires the courage to do what's right rather than what's convenient or institutionally approved. She brought all 47 of us home alive when conventional procedures would have left us to die. The panel's deliberations extended over 4 days as members struggled to reconcile institutional requirements with tactical realities and moral imperatives that had motivated Megan's decision-making. The final decision reflected the complexity of evaluating leadership in situations where conventional procedures had proven inadequate to address life-threatening circumstances.
General Williams's announcement of the panel's findings was delivered with the formal precision that characterized important military decisions, but her words carried implications that extended far beyond Megan's individual case. Captain Torres's actions violated direct orders, but they were motivated by tactical necessity and moral imperative that transcended institutional procedures. Her rescue operation demonstrated exceptional leadership and tactical innovation that saved American lives while achieving strategic objectives. The consequences of the hearing exceeded everyone's expectations and challenged institutional assumptions about discipline, leadership, and the role of moral courage in military decision-making. Instead of facing court-martial proceedings, Megan was promoted to major and assigned to a prestigious position at the Marine Corps War College, where her tactical innovations would be studied and incorporated into leadership training programs. Her rescue operation became a case study in adaptive leadership and tactical innovation, analyzed by military educators who recognized its value for training future commanders who might face similar moral and tactical dilemmas. The operation's success demonstrated that exceptional leadership could overcome seemingly impossible circumstances through courage, innovation, and unwavering commitment to Marine welfare. The broader implications of Megan's actions extended beyond individual recognition to influence military policies regarding women in combat roles and the institutional barriers that had historically limited their opportunities for advancement and recognition. Her successful leadership under extreme conditions provided concrete evidence that gender was irrelevant to tactical competence and moral courage. The Marines who had served under Megan's command requested transfers to her new assignment, demonstrating loyalty and confidence that her leadership had inspired through proven competence rather than abstract qualifications. Their willingness to continue following her represented the kind of trust that defined truly effective military leadership. Years later, when Megan had achieved senior rank and was responsible for training the next generation of Marine officers, she would tell her students that leadership was not about following procedures or maintaining institutional approval. It was about having the courage to make impossible decisions when lives were at stake, the wisdom to innovate when conventional approaches failed, and the moral strength to accept responsibility for the consequences of those decisions. Her story became legend within the Marine Corps, inspiring future generations of officers who would face their own moments of impossible choice. The 47 Marines she had brought home alive represented more than a tactical success. They represented proof that exceptional leadership could transcend every barrier and limitation that others tried to impose. The tactical innovations Megan had developed during the rescue operation were incorporated into Marine Corps doctrine, providing future commanders with proven techniques for operating in complex environments where conventional approaches had proven inadequate. Her use of terrain deception, psychological warfare, and small unit infiltration became standard subjects of study at advanced military schools. The legacy of her leadership extended beyond tactical innovation to encompass fundamental questions about moral courage, institutional loyalty, and the true meaning of military service. She had proven that the highest calling of military leadership was not obedience to authority, but loyalty to the principles that made such service meaningful, and the courage to act when those principles demanded action rather than compliance. Her story became legend within the Marine Corps, inspiring future generations of officers who would face their own moments of impossible choice. The 47 Marines she had brought home alive represented more than a tactical success. They represented proof that exceptional leadership could transcend every barrier and limitation that others tried to impose. The tactical innovations Megan had developed during the rescue operation were incorporated into Marine Corps doctrine, providing future commanders with proven techniques for operating in complex environments where conventional approaches had proven inadequate. Her use of terrain deception, psychological warfare, and small unit infiltration became standard subjects of study at advanced military schools. The legacy of her leadership extended beyond tactical innovation to encompass fundamental questions about moral courage, institutional loyalty, and the true meaning of military service. She had proven that the highest calling of military leadership was not obedience to authority, but loyalty to the principles that made such service meaningful, and the courage to act when those principles demand action rather than compliance. The memorial service held annually for the Marines who had died in the initial ambush became a tradition that honored their sacrifice while celebrating the rescue operation that had prevented additional casualties. Megan's presence at these ceremonies reminded everyone that leadership was measured not by the ability to prevent all losses, but by the courage to act decisively when action could save lives. Her example demonstrated that when others say you can't lead, when they question your strength, when they doubt your resolve, sometimes the most powerful response is not words, but action. The kind of action that saves lives, challenges assumptions, and proves that true leadership recognizes no boundaries except those imposed by moral courage and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the people who depend on your judgment and strength. Up next, you've got two more stand-up stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.